For many of us, certainly for me in any case, the love of tabletop gaming did not begin with rulebooks, miniatures, or the friendly local game store. It began with stories. Stories of warriors and of wicked sorcerers, of haunted ruins and perilous frontiers, stories of princesses, heroes, treasures, and worlds rife with wonder. I found that, if accompanied by the right story, the games we play become so much more engaging and the experience far richer. Due to this, I eagerly sought out new stories to brighten up the mundane. My taste in literature, as well as my taste in history and tabletop gaming, pushed me into the past to discover the stories that served as inspiration for my favorite games. This exploration naturally led me to the archetypal adventurer himself, Conan. While I had known about Conan, I did not really understand the character, gleaning most of my information from the 1982 film Conan the Barbarian, which, while an excellent movie in its own right, does not tell the story of Conan the Cimmerian, a story I may not have come to know and to love if it had not been for a YouTuber that went by the name Grimdark Half-Off. Grimdark Half-Off, real name Chris Neasley, was a young man I had previously been familiar with from other YouTube channels that are sadly no longer around, who I had always enjoyed listening to, both because of his thoughtful insights and because of his spectacular baritone voice. It is criminal that he never got work recording audiobooks. The Grimdark Half-Off channel was his most successful venture into content creation, and it's not hard to see why. Once you've listened to a few of his videos, it becomes clear that he was happy just to talk about the games he was enjoying at the time, whether it was 40k or Guild Wars 2 or what have you. But where his channel really shines is his content discussing Robert E. Howard's Conan, the Hyborian Age, and other great pulp fiction and horror fantasy stories. His vivid descriptions of Howard's works, more than anything else, convinced me to buy an anthology of Howard's Conan stories. The exposure to Howard's works was a great blessing to me in a way that I really needed at that period of my life. Chris's videos delving into the history, culture, and religions of the Hyborian Age, and advice on how inspiration could be drawn from them to enrich one's own tabletop gaming experience are some of my favorite videos on the entire platform. Chris would sadly pass away on October 28, 2025, after a long and brutal battle with a rare and unusually aggressive form of cancer. His passing was a hard blow to those who knew him, myself included. Nevertheless, Chris left a positive mark on me and everyone else who enjoyed his work. This channel was created in the spirit of love for storytelling and gaming that Chris always showed in his videos. A big reason for my decision to start this channel is that I want to make the sort of videos that I had always hoped that Chris would have made. The kind of videos I loved to watch and to listen to as I worked, cleaned my house, or tried my own hand at storytelling in the late hours of the night. The kind of content that is not only entertaining, but insightful and inspiring. That being said, I also want to examine the lineage of the stories of the games I greatly enjoy, such as Warhammer Fantasy, 40k, Kings of War, D&D, Cyberpunk, Call of Cthulhu, all that stuff. And how the subgenre of grimdark fantasy evolved out of the pulp magazines of the 1920s and 30s, where the stories of Robert E. Howard, H.P. Lovecraft, Clive Ashton Smith, and others first introduced their strange worlds, great heroes, and alien horrors beyond human comprehension to a reading public hungry for the macabre and the fantastical. These stories and characters would greatly inspire both writers and game designers alike. For example, Gary Gygax was known to be an admirer of Howard's work. The Conan stories were particularly influential in the creation of Dungeons & Dragons. Many of the early D&D adventures might have been mistaken 4 old Sword and Sorcery adventure stories right out of the pulps. Gygax would later credit many of the pulp fantasy writers and recommended their works as inspiration for would-be dungeon masters and game designers alike in the famous Appendix N of the 1979 Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. There, he cites not just Robert E. Howard, but also writers like Fritz Leiber, Jack Vance, Michael Moorcock, Lord Dunsany, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and many others as wells of inspiration. Similarly, the first edition of RuneQuest 1978 provided a similar list of literary inspiration in its bibliography. On the wargaming side of things, Games Workshop's Warhammer Fantasy Battles was a veritable melting pot of fantasy tropes, settings, and characters drawn from history and literature, including the pulps. The spin-off franchise Warhammer 40k coined the term Grimdark in its famous tagline, "In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war." Warhammer's narrative games and fiction stories often explore the same themes examined in Sword and Sorcery, horror fantasy, and other genres and subgenres published in the pulp magazines, although taken to an absurd degree. For example, the cosmic struggle between law and chaos, civilization and barbarism, and the lines of good and evil being blurred by circumstance. There is a lot to explore here, and I'm excited to get to work on answering questions such as how the stories of Robert E. Howard perfectly capture the spirit of tabletop adventure, how Sword and Sorcery has inspired and influenced early tabletop games and settings, and how Grimdark fantasy came to be and how it stands out from the stories that inspired the subgenre. The goal of this channel is to learn about the crossroads where literature, gaming, and imagination meet. It's about remembering the stories that inspire the games we play, and how these games have kept the stories alive, and how they continue to enrich our lives. As a final aside, I once again have to acknowledge what an inspiration Grimdark Half-Off, i.e. Chris Neasley, was to me. I don't think it would have ever occurred to me to start this channel had it not been for Chris and the community that sprung up around him. I sadly never got to meet Chris in person, but we would occasionally exchange messages over social media. When I received the news of his passing, I really did feel that I had lost a friend. I dedicate this channel to the memory of Chris Neasley because Chris deserves to be remembered. Chris, thank you for your work, your kindness, and your willingness to always be a helper, even while you were suffering. It is my hope that in the spirit of Conan and the other characters of Robert E. Howard, that the people you inspired will persevere in the knowledge that even in the grim darkness of this world, one can find joy in struggle. Rest in peace, Chris. May your memory be eternal. In the next video of this series, I will begin with Robert E. Howard himself, how his life and connections influenced his writing, the strange world of pulp magazines that would give rise to Howard's characters, and how these stories inspired others to recreate those adventures through the medium of tabletop RPGs. Before the grim darkness of the far future are the bloody battlefields of Malus or Panathor. Before machines of war battled for the inner sphere, or the first adventurers delved into the dungeons of Blackmoor, there were the stories that inspired these worlds. From the pages of the pulps to the tabletop, we examine the history of the stories we love and the games we play. I am Deathstalker, your guide into the world of sword and sorcery!